Hey guys, what's up? In continuing with my travels, I'm still in Britain, and I got a pleasure to talk to 4 individuals from Black in Architecture. Black in Architecture first started as a hashtag Black in Architecture, which is collecting experiences of Black British architectural professionals and students in the UK. It's a Black-led research defining responsive actions for racial justice, collecting data and to amplify our voices and documenting our experiences. You'll get in this episode. It's condensed and we really hit on a lot of topics. I got a mixed bag of a lot of experiences, issues that I would barely scratch the surface. It was all impacted by what happened with George Floyd. And to understand that the stuff that we do in the US, the protest, the cause of action has a global reach. With each of these individuals, how George Floyd's murder impacted them and how it created triggers for them and for them to start something is amazing. This is what a protest is about. It's about sparking change. It's about sparking creativity and amplifying your voice. That trigger, wherever it may be, especially for these 4 individuals, express themselves differently. So for one, it was the role of the university and how the university brag about how diverse their campus is. They brag about the number of international students that they have, and to find out that it's all about numbers and it's all about the money. Another thing is that we talked about was the sole practitioner and how difficult it is for a Black British woman who has all her credentials and yet finds it difficult in getting jobs. And you look at your colleagues, you look at people who you went to school with, and they're able to get jobs. And you're like, well, what's wrong with me? And then you tap into your experiences of your first job or your second job. And those experiences kind of train you for what to expect, unfortunately. Another thing we talked about and that I brought up was the Architects Journal magazine. And first of all, they are wickedly expensive. I mentioned that in the episode. We talked about that survey in particular, and this in comparison to what they're doing to what AJ does. So yeah, it's again very concise conversation with 4 individuals. So I record this ahead of time. What you're about to hear happened months ago. Just about. It feels like it anyway. And some things have changed. And I'm going to read off an email that I received. Okay, so thank you again for hosting myself. That's Juliet, Zendaya, Sade, and Irvin on your podcast, Architecture is Political, on the 9th of August, 2020. There's been a few events and changes since we spoke, and I thought it was worth noting these so that the podcast is published in the appropriate context. Sade, Zendaya, and Irving are no longer working with me due to a number of issues that unraveled in the past few weeks. The vision for the research remains an idea that I created, and I will continue to work on it. For now, also, I will be the only person working on it as the founder and principal investigator. But I hope to find a way to open it up again in the future. And I am also in conversation with a number of individuals, groups, and organizations on how to work alongside what already exists, how this research and associated outputs can best serve the wider architectural society. Kind regards, Juliet. Yeah, so I was heartbroken when I read that. I was looking forward to talking to all of them as a group again because it was such a lovely conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to each of them. So again, this is unfortunate, but the Black in Architectural is still going on. It's still going on strong. And I encourage you to not only visit the website, but also Twitter, and they're also on Instagram. So, with all that said, the interview just jumps right off. You be introduced to each person and their stories. Yeah, these things happen. And yeah. So, okay. Here you go with Juliet.
My name is Juliet Setiansa, so I'm an architect here in the UK, and I'm currently doing a PhD in community capacity, BIM-based community capacity development in informal settlements. But I think first thing is introduce ourselves, because we all kind of joined the Black in Architecture project team at different times and from different backgrounds. So I will talk a little bit about how it started, because it all kind of links to your points about what is Black in Architecture, how did we connect with the killing of George Floyd, and the fact that we're collecting data and amplifying voices of Black British professionals and students in the UK. I was born in Ghana, originally from Ghana, and I moved to the UK when I was young. So I started my school here and started my A levels, which is high school here as well. And I studied architecture, the Sheffield School of Architecture. For me, I went into architecture because I quite liked art, and I thought architecture was a bit more open for a more stable career path. Yeah, and so I went along with architecture, and I've stuck to it since I first started my BA. And a lot of things happened along the way in my education that maybe I wasn't aware what if it meant fully until years after, and I reflected on it, and I was like, okay, so that's what that was about. Okay, so but there was always that kind of awareness that I was the only Black person, or I was the only other Black person or other Black female throughout my career, and it had its good moments and bad moments. But when the killing of George Floyd happened, a lot of the trauma kind of revisited. I felt it. I felt it was a very difficult time for me, because I was also under a lot of pressure with my uni work and with my research. And so that point hit me because I was kind of like working really hard, and then I heard this, and it just reminded me of all the hard work I've put into my career over the last almost couple of decades, almost 2 decades now, and having to see maybe, or perhaps my non-Black people, former colleagues, etc., and thinking, but I'm working so hard. Why can't I get these doors being open for me? So it kind of made me relive some of the trauma, and I started mentioning a few of these experiences on my LinkedIn account. And I was aware how awkward it was, especially after people had posted the Black squares. And I went on Twitter one day, and I saw black in the ivory, and I started reading some of the experiences, and I instantly knew it was the US, because over here we don't really discuss our issues like that. So I read a few of these, and I thought, okay, let's search for Black in Architecture. So I typed that into Twitter and searched for it, and nothing came up. So I thought, okay, then, well, just grab it. And I just registered the profile, and one friend engaged with it, Michael Badu. He engaged with it, and he said, what's this about? And we started chatting in our DMs, and we had very deep conversation. At first, it came across as something that was being set up to wake people up or to educate people. So I kind of cleared that up, and I said, no. This is not about that. This is about us, I think, Black people in architecture, grabbing hold of the moment to tell our experiences, and for us also to understand each other's experiences. my experience is going to be completely different to Shade's experience, for example. And if I've been living with just the knowledge of my experience or the expertise of my experience, I think it's worth understanding broadly how others have gone through it or have experienced it, in order to be able to perhaps know what changes that we want. Because at that point there were a lot of issues about discussions about what needs to be changed, how the profession needs to, be more open, and have more Black people in senior or BAME professionals in senior positions, etc. But it all seems to just not touch on how systemic racism actually impacts on the everyday lives of people. And it actually does impact. It impacts on your performance, on your family, on your career, everything. And I felt like a lot of the time my colleagues who might be white or of other racial identity might not actually understand what I'm going through. And at that point, nobody was asking me how I felt about what was happening. So I thought this would be a good moment to, one, connect with my other Black people, and to also get some understanding of what is it that we want changing in the industry. Because that's, for me, that's never clear. There's been measures and policies, but the exact actions that needs to be addressed or needs to be taken on seems not that clear in the industry. And so that's how it started. So we are collecting data, and I'm sure the others will also touch up on it. We are collecting data, it's qualitative data on people's experiences. And initially it was meant to be a bit more like Black in the Ivory, where people voluntarily, if they were to tweet their experience, then we will amplify, we will share it, we will retweet it, etc. But obviously it's been quite experimental, and it hasn't gone exactly how maybe Black in the Ivory hashtag has been going. So we've kind of adapted and adjusted and reprogrammed to accommodate the dynamics over here in the UK. Okay.
How old were you when you migrated?
I was in so I must have been 11.
Okay.
Oh, you're going to ask my age now.
No, I'm not going to ask your age. We're not going to go there. No. We're all 21 right now. We're all 21. No, because you're old enough to remember.
Yeah.
Different.
Yeah.
Did you feel
I'm old enough. Yes. I'm old enough to remember being asked where I got my clothes from, because in Africa we live on trees at school. This was at school, and I went to school in one of the most multicultural regions or areas in the UK. But yeah, it was a very painful process. Very painful process. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember it clearly yesterday. It's hard to forget, isn't it? I'm sure my other colleagues will also share their experiences in this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who's next?
I guess I can go next. So hi, I'm Zubaida. I'm a recent graduate. I just finished my part 1, which is the undergrad over here. For me, like the whole George Floyd, that's for a lot of Black people as well, because I spent the past 3 years in my studies just trying to navigate my whole identity and everything. So I'm mixed race Black, I'm Nigerian, and my grandmom is English, so she's here from Yorkshire. I lived in Nigeria till I was 11, and then I lived in Egypt till I was 18, 17, and then I moved to Scotland for university. So kind of I grew up with a lot of like cultural environments around me. Some of my family members are from other parts of the world as well. And so I just, for a few years in my studies, I just kind of spent a lot of time trying to navigate my identity through architecture. I didn't really want to do architecture per se. I fell into it. I didn't really know what it was about my heritage. So like architecture across Nigeria. And I found that there was barely anything being taught. So in architectural history lessons, it would just kind of go off in passing. They'd fall so the regions where a lot of the students in my course are from. So for me, it was just I spent a lot of time researching non-Western architecture aside from my studies. And that kind of infuriated me because, our schools kind of claim to be diverse. They invite all these students, but really it's just we're cash cows. They see international students as a way to make money and nothing else, and they don't cater to that experience. So for me, I kind of spent a lot of time in my studies kind of wanting to explore that aspect for myself. My dissertation was on Afrofuturism, and like there's basically no support. This is all individually led, and that was kind of really frustrating for me. So when the George Floyd murder happened and the protests happened, I was kind of silent because it was really emotional. Like, you spend a lot of time kind of thinking over these things. I spent the past 3 years arguing with people in my university, or not necessarily arguing, but just kind of voicing out my thoughts and concerns, but they were just kind of brushed off. So it was a very intense moment for me, and I just decided not to say anything because I didn't see it as my responsibility to educate anyone on what was happening. But then I think the one moment that kind of spurred me on, I remember, was seeing a comment about protests here in the UK. And a lot of people genuinely thought, oh, this is an American problem. We don't really care in the UK, and it's really irresponsible of you to want to organize events like this in the UK. And that just pissed me off, like, because the UK was built on the exploitation of so many people. A lot of people aren't aware of like the violent history that the UK has, and the way it's kind of the systemic racism has embedded in every single thing we do. So that's when I reached out to we have a student-led architecture magazine at Edinburgh University. So I reached out to them, and I think this Architecture Society, because they were very silent during those few months of protest, they hadn't said anything. So I was like, look, I have something to say. This is an article. I'm going to collect student experiences. And they published it. And then throughout that whole course, I found out about Black in Architecture. So I messaged them on Twitter, and I got in a conversation with Juliet, and I just really liked what they were doing. And that's kind of how I got into being involved with Black in Architecture. Yeah.
Okay. Next.
Oh, I can go next. I was a fellow student. I'm also a recent graduate. I just did my master's in architecture. So I was born in Kenya. And was
What's
raised.
your name?
Irvin, sorry, should have started there. My name is Irvin Toretich. I'm from Kenya. I was born and raised there, and then moved to Rwanda for a couple of years. But I was still in education, high school in Kenya. And I did fall in love with architecture. I knew I wanted to do architecture from my high school. Just the idea of creating an environment to influence people's routines really fascinated me, and that's the main reason why I wanted to do it. And in that, I started looking for where would I be able to get the most out of learning architecture, and the UK was a really good option. And the UK universities have a really strong presence in Kenya. They are associated with different agencies that go to the different schools, and my school is one of them, my high school, where they advertise the university, the courses, what they do, the kind of support they provide, and they lures you in. And I was like, okay, this is a good place to go. And then I came. So I ended up in a bachelor's in the south of England. I did my 3 years there, and towards the end of that, actually before I even get towards the end of that, as I came in the beginning to the UK, having been raised and born and raised in East Africa, racism wasn't something that I exactly experienced, or rather didn't know. I saw it on TV. I saw it, people talk about it. So me being a Black person, I said, I was like, obviously I'm going to support that, but I hadn't really experienced racism because everyone around me was the same culture, was the same race. So coming to the UK, my mind hadn't switched to, okay, racism might be more intense here. I just came to learn a different culture, to mingle with different sets of people from all over the world. And that's that. Then when I came here, and then I started to notice little things that then in my mind I was like, oh wait, is that racism? Man, are they being racist? I'm not sure, because I hadn't really experienced that. Then it started being a thing of having to find my identity as a Black person in this new culture, in this university that is multicultural, interracial. And having studied and graduated, then came the whole thing that started frustrating me of trying to get employment as a Black person, which I guess we'll go into further detail later on. But that then spurred me into advocating for more transparency to international students, to what they need to accomplish and what they need to do once they get here in order to continue progressing their education, their career. Because once you get here and you're in university, that's it. As long as you pay, the university doesn't care about you anymore. You give out your money, you get your education, figure it out for yourself. Then I quickly realized I cannot lean on the universities to help me as they said they would when they first came to our high school. The support they said they would give were not as relevant to me as they would be to a local British student. So then I had to figure that out for myself. And coming back from my master's, I came with the mindset that I need to be able to figure this out without relying on the university. Then I started getting in touch with some of my lecturers, and we have a network now for the university here in Manchester, University of Manchester, the Manchester School of Architecture, to create a network of alumni and present and current students from different parts of the world. So I lead the current network for Africa, and the whole idea for that is to get to help the students or the alumni who have already graduated or who are coming into the UK, connect them with each other and help them understand what it is that they need to be doing, how they need to be addressing different situations, not just to stay in the UK, but opening different opportunities for them in different parts of the world, back in Africa, in East Africa, West Africa, because that is not available for them through the university, and that is what I am passionate to try and help provide these international students. And then when my work in that, talking to my colleague who knew Juliet, then Juliet contacted me about Black in architecture. And we had a conversation with Juliet, and I told her my interest is beyond I asked her if it's just going to be limited to the UK Black in architecture community, or can we also extend it to the international community? And Juliet loved the idea, and I said, if we're down for that, I am down for that, and we would definitely want to work together. And then that's where we are now.
All right. And finally,
I'm Sade. I was born in France. My parents had me whilst they were there studying, and then we moved to Nigeria when I was 3. And we stayed there till I was 10, and then moved to the UK. So for me, the UK, it was because obviously I had very sort of childhood memories of Nigeria. So back then, moving to the UK was a sort of trying to sort of fit into a new culture, trying to sort of the process, I think, is a sort of a loss of identity, a loss of culture when you're trying to fit in. So I went through that process without actually being conscious that I was going through that process. I went to a school that was very diverse, had lots of different people from Asian communities, West Caribbean communities, African communities, as well as British students. So the school is very diverse, and it was a girls' school. So it had a feminist twist, which was that you could do whatever you wanted to do. And that created an environment that made it comfortable to have a much more broader perspective of what I could do. I got a work experience in an architectural practice. I didn't actually want the experience. It's a funny story. A girl in the very first lesson of art class said she wanted to be an architect. And I didn't know what that was. I asked her what it was, and she said, to do with buildings, and that's what I want to do. And this is at the age of 11. So come the age of 15, that really stuck with me. So when we were trying to sort out work experience, I was trying to get into a graphic design studio. She obviously trying to get into this architectural practice, was schemed so that she would put the graphic design studio as her first choice. I would do the same with the architectural practice, only it came back the other way around. So I ended up in architectural practice, loved it. I was exposed to social housing, and that was it, loved it. So the experience in architectural practice has been interesting, working for others. When you're the only Black person in the office, it's not a very comfortable experience, I would say. So for me, as soon as I got qualified, I was thinking about setting up. So I would say maybe 3 years post qualifying, I set up my practice, which was 10 years ago. And it's a very small practice. It's micro practice. It's been myself. It hasn't really grown. So that has been a challenge, trying to figure out why this practice is not growing. What is it that I'm not doing right? Why is it that my white counterparts are able to grow and get the opportunities? I'm networking. So what is it that I'm not quite doing right? It so happens that around this period with COVID and Black Lives Matter, I'm working with a local authority on a small project, and they put out a public procurement exercise, which is to try and find the architectural practices that they want to work with and give projects to. So it's like a simple way of seeing it is it's like a menu list of preferred architectural practice. So anytime the council wants to procure a project, they will refer to this list. And this list would be in place for 4 years. So I work in this district, as you would say in the US, we call it borough. I work in this borough. I'm currently working with them on a small project. I submit my proposal thinking I'm in a strong position. I am not chosen. And then they finally publish the list, and there isn't a Black-led practice. And it's in an area where it's very diverse. It's 60% ethnic minorities. And it's got a strong Black African population. So it's very, very it's very glaring. You can't ignore this. And at the time it was published, it was just COVID was just the main issue that everyone was concerned about. And for me, when I saw the list, I thought, in a post-COVID world, this list is ridiculous, because the impact on COVID on the BAME, we call them BAME, it's Black ethnic minorities. It's the acronym that we use here. So the impact on ethnic minorities in the UK has been very severe. We know that a high proportion have suffered and died from COVID. We know that it's overcrowded housing that's contributed to this. So when I saw the list, and I thought, in a post-COVID world, this list is just grotesque. And it sort of kind of built momentum on LinkedIn. And then Black Lives Matter blew up. Just before it blew up, just the weekend before it actually blew up and the statues were falling, I wrote an email to the local authority to just, because I'm working with teams there already and I have relationships there. So I felt I could see that my Black colleagues were already talking about this, and I felt I've got to say something. I can't just be silent on this issue just because I'm working with them. And maybe because I am working with them, I'm better placed to talk about this issue. So I wrote an email and just said, look, I think, you guys tried to make this procurement process accessible, but I think you didn't go far enough. You made it accessible for small practices, but actually in terms of Black-led practices, you need to consider that when we start our practices, we're coming from a different socioeconomic backgrounds. When our white counterparts are starting their practices, they're highly networked. They've got family connections that they start to build a portfolio. And then when we're networking for opportunities, we've got the hang-ups of race, gender, all of this unconscious issues going on. White counterparts don't have that. So when we come to a procurement exercise with our portfolios, it's going to be drastically different to someone who hasn't faced these challenges. If you're comparing Black architects to white counterparts, it's just not a level playing field. So I tried to explain this, and Black Lives Matter blew up. And then it was, I think, having said that email, I'm usually quite silent. I give my opinions to myself. So having written that email, Black Lives Matter happening, I felt in a very sort of activist mood of I want change. We want to access opportunities. The reason why we're in this situation in this country is historical legacy, and that needs to be acknowledged. And also when we migrate due to colonialism and all of that, when we migrate into Britain, we're living in social housing, typically, and we're from different socioeconomic backgrounds. All of this comes into play. And also that the profession is changing. It's changing. It's having a different, different backgrounds are coming into the profession. So you've got to open the opportunities up. So I came across Black in Architecture, got in touch with Juliet, and I said, I'm feeling highly politically charged. How can I help? And that's how I got involved.
He's ready to fight.
Yes.
I could talk to each of you individually for like 3 hours. You covered, what, 4 or 5 countries between each of you? No, more. Like 7, 8. Because, yeah, like it's...
I think so.
Oh my gosh. It's really an international, and all converge into one country that started racism.
Oh no.
Did you guys have any role models?
Oh, I have a bitter story about role models in architecture. I didn't, not in architecture.
Okay.
I have one in my career, in my life. My mom.
Not specifically.
Yeah, no, not in architecture. I almost had one. I almost had one when I was doing after my MArch, but sometimes they say, excuse me, it's better to not meet your icon. Is that right?
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How about any of you guys?
I sort of picked some up along the way, because I wasn't, like, I was through architecture, I was kind of trying to navigate my own identity and understand my architecture. So along the way, I think it was around second year, I started reading extensively on West architecture in West Africa. And just the lack of architects in general just kind of made me do like a really extensive search. So I just kind of came across Mariam Kamara. And she, for me, was like kind of the pivotal moment in my trying to understand what I was trying to do. She kind of helped me understand what I wanted to gain out of architecture. So I guess you could, to a certain extent, call her an icon, but I didn't kind of fix my aspirations on what she does, but I kind of try to look around that and what I want to do for myself and the people around me.
Can you have a role model practice instead of a person?
Hey, whatever encourages.
That's a good one.
Because to me, one of the practices that changed the way I think is a practice in Kenya. They're called CAVE. And the idea within CAVE is that they're researching. It's almost like what our Black in Architecture group is doing. But the CAVE practice, they're researching into the history of Kenya and the architectural history. Because a lot of people, at least the director was telling me in his life, a lot of people say that they want African architecture to be expressed a lot more. But when you get down to it, what is African architecture? Africa is a really big place, and you have a lot of different countries in this continent. So within Kenya, CAVE is trying to differentiate what actually is Kenyan architecture. And the answer to that is not exactly the exciting bit, but the process to it. The fact that there's something that something that needs to happen, but you don't know what it is. So how can it happen if you don't know what needs to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think one thing I've noticed is that in trying to kind of raise awareness on how deep and systemic racism is, especially from like an African background, we tend to not subconsciously kind of say, oh, African, but then people kind of forget that how diverse Africa is. Like, I lived in Kenya for 6 months, and as a Nigerian, I had no idea like how different our cultures were. Like, on a superficial level, I did, but like we don't really, even within the continent, interact with each other as much to understand the differences that we have.
I have a funny story. When my girlfriend came to the UK from Kenya as well, I always hear her introducing herself to other people, saying that she's from Africa. I always hit her hand and say, you're not from Africa, you're from Kenya.
You're right. Even over here, I always scream and yell 50 plus countries on a continent of Africa.
Yeah.
And it's not a country, it's a continent. I think it's part of ignorant Americans too. They really don't know the difference between a Nigerian and Kenyan, or South Africa and Nigeria. That's the only, and Egypt. But they don't even consider that as part of Africa. It's amazing. So
yeah. I think in this day and age, to kind of accept that, I don't know the difference between two countries in Africa. I think we just owe ourselves some kind of dignity to make it our responsibility to learn about these things, especially when it plays such a massive role in the development of or the growth of another country, most of the countries here in Europe, definitely in the UK. So I think this is linked to people who are protesting for a change in the curriculum, in school curriculum as well, not just in architecture, because it starts from as young as nursery. What are we teaching? What books are we showing and writing? And which authors are we showing? I've got a little girl, and now that more than ever, I'm making an extra effort, especially being outside of Africa, making it my responsibility to make sure that she gets both sides of the story. Yeah, so I think the change in curriculum, the protest on that has to, hopefully that we see some change, but there's no excuse for ignorance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, it's. I'd just like to chip in on that. The curriculum is designed to whitewash history, to be on the lecturers writes the history, writes their version of history. So it's there to sort of to sanitize what the British did, but in a diverse, multicultural society, it actually does us harm. I feel that young ethnic minority children, I'll speak for myself, I had a great school experience, but I will say I was not protected. I was in a diverse school, so I was not protected. I wasn't ready for the experience I would face in the workplace. I wasn't ready for the sort of the prejudices, the racism that would come up. So I think it doesn't prepare ethnic minorities children in terms of what's going to come up. And I think in terms of British kids that have been actually born here, I think it's sort of, it doesn't make you aware of, when you go through the school system and then you become an adult, it doesn't allow you to become aware of your privileges. So you're unaware of how history has brought us here and how we are in a system where you benefit and how you benefit. So it sort of puts you in a very sort of kind of, how do I say, a shielded position where you can choose to close yourself off and enjoy the privileges that you have. And so when you're challenged, you're like, oh, they're just making a fuss, they're just complaining, it's them again. Whereas if we're actually, exposed to history from both sides, you're ready to kind of, deal with the world and maybe have a better debate and maybe a better society from it.
Mm-hmm. I want to touch upon the Architects Journal. Architecture Journal?
Architects Journal. Okay.
Yeah. AJ. That's extremely expensive for me to get over here.
For myself too.
It's hundreds of dollars for a magazine for me to get it. But anyway, every year they do a survey and they publish it, and it asks the question. I think it was a long time ago. I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago. I didn't dig too deep into the publication, but I remember every year they have something and they publish the women, and then with the BAME, you guys are aware of this. And when you first came across it, what were your reactions? And I guess what I'm trying to get at is they already established and published the blatant systematic racism that happens in the practice of architecture. How is this different from what they're publishing to what's happening now?
So I should chip in because I know a little bit about the AJ. I'm a subscriber. So at the moment, they've collaborated with an organization called the Stephen Lawrence Trust to carry out a survey. They carried out a survey the first time around about 2 years ago, and they carried one out again this year, and it just showed that the experiences are getting worse for BAME people in practice. What they have done a couple of weeks ago is, because they're realizing that it's a movement that's going on at the moment, it's not a moment. So they have essentially looked at that survey again and interrogated it and looked at what could be done in terms of entry into architecture education. And once students are in education, what can be done to make sure that they stay, because we have a sort of, we've got 3 stages in our architectural education in the UK. And what we know is that BAME students drop out at different stages. There's a break between part 1 and part 2 where you've got to get a year's work experience in office, and then you go back into part 2, and then you have to get work placement again to be able to do your part 3. But we know that people are dropping out at different stages. So the article looks to see what can be done to ensure that BAME students are retained all the way through. So it looks at education, and then it looks at life and practice. What could be done in terms of diversity? I have my ideas around diversity, but they talk about, having different BAME people at different levels in organizations, not just that we're finding they're just, at the bottom ranks, but actually what can we do to get them up at directorship level? And then it looks at procurement, which I touched on earlier, which is we need local authorities to be opening up opportunities. Local authorities have not employed. I mean, they've employed me on a small project, but if you look at the stats, it's not very good in terms of employing BAME-led practices. So that's what the AJ is doing at the moment. They're trying to be topical on the matter. So they are trying to kind of come up with recommendations of what the profession could be doing.
What would be some of your recommendations in terms of practice?
In terms of practice, from my experience, so I went into practice maybe 15 years ago, actually, and I worked for a big practice that I'm not going to name. When I got there, through conversations with colleagues, they let me know that when they received my CV, they were expecting a man. So I don't know what that meant when they said they saw my CV and they thought I was a man. But I got the job, but it was a painful experience because the kind of mentorship that I got, there was no mentorship really. I got very sort of basic, uninteresting work, unmotivating work. And I was in a team that had other people from my uni that I knew. Also part 2 students, and they were getting really good experience. One was sat next to the project lead. So he was able to have such a full grasp of the project, whereas here was I was doing M&E coordination, really not really understanding this big project or what was going on, completely out of my depth. And so the mentorship that I received was just not there really. And it felt like it was a tick box exercise. I was the only Black person there. There was one other Asian girl who's cut one.
How big was the practice?
At the time, there were over 100.
And you were the only Black person?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
100 people?
Yeah.
This is very common. I mean, it's not unusual.
Yeah. It was, yeah. And it felt like a tick box exercise. And thankfully in the UK, there's a system, if you're going to do your part 3, you have to report back to the school to get your logbook signed. And so when I went to my university, the woman that I saw said, look, you're not getting the best of experiences. Unless you really see a ladder, a career ladder in this place, I suggest you move to a smaller practice where they will use you, because they need you. They can't just have you there sitting around doing nothing. So yeah, I think you better move. So, which is what I did. So I think my recommendations, it's not just about getting, I say it like this in the most crudest way, it's not about just getting Black bodies in. You've got to change the culture, and you might even need to look at the structure of the organization to make it safe places for people to thrive. So if you just do the tick box exercises and you have people that are just not willing to share and provide support, it's just going to be a traumatic experience for whoever comes into that organization. So diversity, yes, but look at the culture and look at what you can be doing to make sure that they get all the support that they need to thrive.
Yeah, I guess let me just jump in on that with kind of similar recommendation, but kind of a little bit changed towards architectural education, about BME students dropping out at different stages of education. In my experience, I did definitely see a significant difference of Black international students in my bachelor's, where we had about 180 students. There was quite a range of diversity in my bachelor's, but the moment you cross over to my master's, I think we're almost that I've seen or interacted with almost 15 of about the same number, 180 or so. So my master's education, my bachelor's, there is quite a significant difference of the UNI community that is included. So what I have been thinking about over the past year and a half or so, 2 years as I come to my graduation is how this education system would be able to support and represent the Black international students better. Is that I know once I graduated, I didn't have any idea of what I needed to do to get my work permit, which is a tier 2 visa. When you come to the UK, you are on a tier 4 visa, which is a student visa. And in order to work, you need to get a tier 2 visa, which is a work permit. And there's literally almost no information from the university on how to get that, because you need a practice to sponsor you on that. And I only got to realize this once I started applying. And once I started applying in my undergraduate, and my practices were telling me if I need a tier 2 visa, if I need a work permit, do I have the right to work? So I'm thinking, I have a student visa. So is that not a right to work? I went back to the university, the careers advice, career support, because that's the obvious first place to ask for help. And the unanimous advice that have been given time and time again is that just go to the government website. Go read it. It's on the government website. We don't know much about it. It's on the government website. I can give you the link. Tier 2 visa, I'm not too sure about it. So the unanimous advice, not just for my undergrad, but for my bachelor's as well, is that literally almost no one knows what to do.
That's crazy.
If nobody knows what to do, how am I meant to know what to do? So I decided, you know what? I'll just research it for myself. I'll figure this out on my own and try to get the best out of it. Try to network with as many people who have gone through the same system. So I would really recommend the universities to have some kind of expert or someone who's knowledgeable in this transition between tier 4, which is a student, to tier 2, which is a work permit, to be able to at least have a basis of information. Research for yourself, definitely, but have someone there who's able to guide you in as much as a local student will be able to get support.
Did you have the same experience too?
I kind of had like a pseudo international student experience because I was at university as an international student, but I have a British passport. So like I didn't have to deal with the visa issues and whatnot. But when it came to, so I did like a sandwich course. So we had like a semester out to work and practice. So I was interested, like I told myself, because I was interested in working eventually in working with West African architecture, I told myself at the very least to find a firm somewhere on the continent. That was just kind of my criteria, just so I could get a better understanding of what it'd be like to work there, even though it's not necessarily the same in different countries. And just trying to get a better understanding in terms of the support you'd have when you're working outside the UK or Europe for that matter, is there's very little available. So I remember we had a lecture, I think, where they give us a few talks and they give us a bit of advice on what it's going to be like in employment in terms of how you deal with, say, visa issues or pay or things like that, or how do you even log your experiences outside the ECPE that we have here in the UK. Because even though you can get outside the UK, you still need a minimum amount of experience, I think, to kind of qualify eventually. So I'm not entirely sure. There's just kind of a few grey spots in terms of how universities address things outside of the UK, given the fact that I'd say a third of students in most universities are international that they need to address.
For me, it was a bit different because I didn't have any issues with visa, etc. Because I had indefinite leave, and then I became a British citizen, so I didn't have any issues in that respect. But I can imagine it being quite difficult if you're studying architecture and you have Oh, actually, I do remember one time when we had to go on a field trip, just applying for visa to travel to Europe. Yeah, so those were the only issues. But in terms of working, I haven't got any. I didn't have any issues with that.
Okay, so for a long time, I guess my living in the UK situation was unsettled, let's say. I think that's the best way to describe it. So for, let's say, for 10 years, it was unsettled. And then through doing my first year of my degree course, we had a field trip to go to. And so I had a discussion with my mother and I thought, okay, we've got a situation here. I've got a field trip. How are we going to manage this? And she got in touch with our local MP. And that then started the process of us becoming nationalised in the UK. And that started the process of us becoming British citizens. So actually the architecture education prompted us to really address a problem that we didn't want to look at. And it improved, obviously, having the security of being nationalised in the UK. Just it created a different sort of security. Yeah, it's a complex story to talk about when you have that period of living in the shadows, if I can say that, of not drawing attention to yourself because you haven't got the correct status, and then suddenly we kind of faced it, sorted it, and it sort of gave us a certain level of security. And it's interesting because then what happened was that there was this sort of a beginning of embracing my Nigerian identity. Up until that point, I was trying to assimilate and trying to fit in and try not to draw attention. And then once I became a British citizen, there was a sort of going back to Nigeria because now suddenly we can do that. And then there was this sort of more kind of easing feeling, a bit of ease about my Nigerian identity. But still, there's still that, if you're working in practice, there's still that kind of trying to fit into the office culture. And that was my story in terms of these issues.
I have more questions, but it's about that time. I would love to have you guys back on because I want to talk about Brexit. I want to talk about just being the anomaly and assimilation. I've struggled with that since I started this architecture profession, the different levels of assimilation, from happy hour to the language or the lingo of, your colleagues, because sometimes you don't get it. I remember, real brief, I was at work and this old school Black performer died, Teddy Pendergrass, that's his name. Mm. And I was devastated. And I was like, oh my gosh, can you believe he died? And they were like, who's that? And I was just like, oh my gosh, how do you not know who this man is? Or even politics or issues that reflects us, they have no idea. TV shows, I don't watch Friends. It's the culture of it. So I have to have you guys back on to talk more about this. I noticed on your website, you sign up and can you talk more about your website and what people can do to participate?
Hi, yes. So we've been inviting people to share their experiences with us. I mean, it has to be experiences in the UK just because we're working within architecture as defined here in the UK. So there's a Google form which is still live, and it would be great to get more experiences. So if anybody's listening to this from the UK or maybe had some experiences as part of their education or career here in the UK but are no longer here and they have some experiences to share, that would be great, because the more we have, the more solid our analysis will be able to propose a strong set of actions for change, hopefully.
Okay, so thank you guys so much. Again, we're no longer strangers, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been great.
Have a good evening. Have a cup of tea. I don't know what you guys do.
A cup of tea.
Crumpets. I don't know. I'm sorry.
I do drink jollof tea.
So some jollof rice and some.
Oh, you know about jollof rice.
Yes. Yes. I got a best friend who's okay, guys.
Okay,
Thank you so
thank
much.
All right,
you.
thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, listeners! I have an exciting announcement. I decided to launch a membership program for the show, where you have a chance to support me and the show directly. I love creating the show, and it means the world to me that you all tune in to keep hearing me week after week. But it takes an immense amount of time and energy to produce. I want to keep the show going, and I want to invest in its growth. And I also want you to become a partner with me in this journey. That's why I'm excited to give you a chance to officially become a supporter of the show at glow.fm/archispolly, ARCHISPOLLY, or by clicking the link in the show notes. It's quick and easy. It takes less than 30 seconds and just takes clicking a link in the show notes and using Apple or Google Pay. You don't have to create any new logins, and you can contribute as much or as little as you like. If this show is part of your day or week and you like what I'm doing, then visit glow.fm/archispolly, all one word, and support me and the show in any way you can today.